Good day, and welcome to another HIMSS TV Digital Chat. I'm Bill Sawicki, Features Editor of Healthcare IT News, a HIMSS media publication. My guest today is Bob Chaput. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, Bill, pleasure to be with you today.
Bob is founder and executive chairman of Clearwater Compliance, a cyber risk management firm. He also is author of the new book, Stop the Cyber Bleeding, which is the subject of our digital chat today. I have a few questions for you, Bob, so let's dig in.
All right, sounds good.
So my first question, what's the significance of your book's title, Stop the Cyber Bleeding? What bleeding are you referring to?
That's a great question, Bill. Of course, it's a metaphor. And the bleeding to which I'm referring is what I'll describe as the pain, the loss, the harm our patients are experiencing as an unintended consequence of the digitization of our healthcare system over the last decade, intense over the last decade. And with this digital transformation, we've not had a concomitant cyber risk management transformation to come along with it. As a result, we've created a lot of new ways for there to be a loss or harm. And let me explain. I'll put it in the context of what is three core tenets of healthcare, right? Quality and safe care, access to care, timely care. And simultaneously, I'll put it in the context of information security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So when it comes to the bleeding, think about these kinds of examples. The millions of records that have been bleeding out of our healthcare system, so-called compromises of confidentiality, the upshot of which has been with this information in the wrong hands, it can result in adverse employment decisions, adverse credit decisions, it can result in relationship decisions, bad things. Nobody intended these to happen, but these are the compromises of confidentiality. In another area, think about the millions of records that have been locked up as a result of these so-called ransomware attacks. When that information is locked up, it's not available. And in the context of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, that's a compromise of availability. So you might say, so what's the big deal? Well, some recent cases back in September in Dusseldorf, Germany, a woman presented herself at the emergency room, was turned away because all this hospital systems were down. She was diverted to another hospital 20 miles away and died. Now, experts are going to debate and fight over what the root cause of death was, but there's certainly a connection there. University of Vermont medical system, health system, has been recovering from a ransomware attack over the course of the last several months. The upshot of that, we've had patients that have chemotherapy postponed, surgeries have been postponed, delays in diagnoses. Compromise of availability can have an adverse effect on quality and safe care, access to care, and timely care. And I'll just sort of wrap up in this question by talking about in the book, I open up the very first section and the very first chapter, which is entitled When Something Cyber Happens. And I discuss an attack on a radiology department where CT scan images are modified, erasing the presence of cancerous nodules, resulting in a misdiagnosis of radiologists. Now, the case that I'm citing in my book is actually one that was shown in research done at Ben Gurion University to be possible. Two bad things happened. One, CT scan images were modified. This is the compromise of integrity of information. And number two, radiologists could be fooled. So these are the examples of the kind of quote unquote bleeding that I'm referring to. That makes sense?
Yes, that's fascinating, and that makes a lot of sense. My next question for you is that your book, Stop Cyber Bleeding, offers a thorough mix of context and strategy and real life examples and some actionable steps to build an enterprise cyber risk management program. Since we can't go through it all, I was wondering if you maybe have a favorite anecdote or example that illustrates the benefits of a thoughtful risk-based approach?
Well, first of all, thank you for the comments about the book. That was my intent and my desire. Let me provide a little context, and I'll give you an example. So the context is around one of the key points that I try to emphasize in the book is a strong recommendation that organizations understand the difference between a risk-based approach to cybersecurity versus a checklist-based approach to cybersecurity. And I'm obviously a big fan of the risk-based approach. And what that means is it means taking the time and effort to address governance, to address people, to address processes, to address technology, to address engagement, all the elements that you would consider in any transformation project. The point is to help put in place an equally robust transformational program around cybersecurity, as has happened around the digital transformation that's occurred in healthcare. That's a thoughtful risk-based approach. On the other hand, we have organizations that are chasing after the threat du jour, the vulnerability du jour. They're looking for checklists that they're going to be able to they're going to be able to adopt on a one-size-fits-all basis. And that's absolutely unequivocally the wrong way to go about it. So here's the example, if that context makes sense. Here we are in February 2021, going all the way back to March of 2020. The world in healthcare changed with COVID. We've emerged to big time telehealth. We've emerged to big time telework. We've emerged to devices being shipped to patients' homes so they can connect them themselves for the purpose of remote patient monitoring, among other operating changes, big time changes in the operating model. And so those organizations that are chasing after the threat du jour and the vulnerability du jour are looking for some checklist. So now how do I worry about biomedical devices in the home? On the other hand, the organizations that really put forth a thoughtful risk-based enterprise cyber risk management program very simply pivoted to look at their new processes, their new information assets, the new risks or exposures associated with those information assets. In other words, they just took a good program that was already in place and applied it to a new set of circumstances. That's one of the big differences and one of the big values of having such a program in place. Enterprise Cyber Risk Management Program, if you establish it and implement it, it can be brought to bear on the changing assets, the changing threats, the changing vulnerabilities, the changing safeguards. The world is changing, and healthcare is no different than any other part of the world right now. That's the value, that's the example, if you will, around enterprise cyber risk management and the value that comes from that.
One final question for you today, Bob. You emphasize that enterprise cyber risk management is not an IT problem, but an enterprise risk management issue, and handled well, a business enabler. What advice do you have for our viewers on how to engage their C-suite and board in a productive, ongoing dialogue about how to turn cyber risk management into a business enabler?
Yeah, that's also a great question. First of all, I'll validate the observation that it's emerging as a real enterprise risk management issue. Gartner just in January issued some research based on surveying, I think it was 235 board members. And among other things that emerged, number one, cyber risk is a top source of risk for board members right now. Number two, they projected that by 2025, 40% of organizations will end up with dedicated cybersecurity committees as part of the board of directors. So first validation, what you cite is very real. So now let's get back to the matter of what advice do I have to engaging the board in these conversations. The punchline is start talking business. Think about for a moment a fulcrum or a seesaw, if you will, And those of us who work in compliance and privacy and security and risk management, we worry about what we think is this very weighty matter of enterprise cyber risk management, if you will, cybersecurity. On the other hand, and that's good, that's our focus. On the other hand, what are the executives, the C-suite thinking about? What's the board thinking about when they come into the board meetings or they come into work every day? They're worrying about the financials of the organization. They're worrying about competition. They're worrying about mergers and acquisitions. They're worrying about their personal liability, if you will. These are the kinds of things that are on their mind. So using my fulcrum, if you want to elevate the cyber risk management conversation, you've got to start talking about the things that are on the minds of the board. For example, in the area of financials, talk about protecting the balance sheet. I very quickly mentioned University of Vermont and the ransomware attack that's happening there. Their CEO came out within the last 30 days and said, we are losing $1.5 million a day in revenue as a result of this attack. That's not an IT problem. That's a pretty serious business risk management issue. Another aspect of it, from a financial point of view, the three major credit rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, Standard & Poor's, have all announced and have implemented the consideration of an organization's cyber risk posture when they put out the credit rating. What does that mean? Well, that means that's going to affect the cost of capital in the organization. That's a good business conversation to have with the CFO of the organization. Think for a moment about reputation. This is a business conversation. We're not going in the weeds and talking about vulnerability scans and penetration tests. Think about reputation. What's happening now, talk to your board, talk to your executives about the massive move of consumerism in healthcare right now. And what that translates into is how your reputation is going to be rated and regarded. Platforms like Google, Apple, Bing, Facebook, pick your favorite search engine. I don't know about you, I go to a doc or a clinic, and by the time I get home, I have an email that says, please go out on Google and post a report. Well, there was a 2019 healthcare reputation report that looked at 3,800 plus hospitals who were evaluated on these platforms, Google, Facebook, Apple, et cetera, and made a determination that a good reputation drives higher revenue per bed in a hospital than those organizations in the lower quartile, if you will. That's a business conversation, right? M&A activity. Deals can get busted left and right, or the dynamics of the transaction can change pretty dramatically. While not in healthcare, Yahoo had mega breaches in 2013, 2014. They were acquired by Verizon. As a result of those breaches and the unexpected, unbudgeted costs, it ended up shaving about $350 million off the value of Yahoo in that particular transaction. That's a business conversation. Just one more, talk about competition. We worked with a large client healthcare system in the Midwest. Unfortunately, and this is public domain information, I won't name them, they had the dubious distinction of 3 reportable breaches to the Office for Civil Rights and Health and Human Services within 9 months. When they announced, as required by the breach notification rule, that they had that 3rd breach, their competitor was just laying in wait. And as soon as they made their announcement, as required by the breach notification rule, the competitor down the street started a full-on media campaign that basically said, how can you trust your healthcare organization that can't even keep track of your health information? I mean, powerful competitive stuff. And so engaging the board conversations is what I think, business conversations is what I think is going to be very, very key to elevating and leveraging and turning cyber risk management into a business enabler.
Well, I'd like to thank my guest today, Bob Chaput, author of the book, Stop the Cyber Bleeding. I'd like to thank you for tuning in to our discussion today. So keep your eyes on HIMSS TV for more digital chats coming soon.